Trading in Path of Exile 2 is a core skill, and learning how to use the trade site properly will only take you a few minutes and will earn you a huge amount of currency in the long run. This video will show you how to use the trade site like a pro, for both price checking valuable gear for sale and for buying way better items at cheaper prices than what you're doing right now. I'll take beginners through the site's interface and options, and then I'll demonstrate step by step how to improve a search to find better results. So this right here is the official trade site. You can use it to search all items currently for sale in your Path of Exile 2 game mode. Make sure you do select the right league over here. To find something specific, like a unique item for example, it's as simple as typing it in the box and clicking search or pressing enter. So we can type in gold rim and then press enter to search for gold rims. Now if your search looks a bit different, you can set the layout to your liking over here. There's a few different modes. Personally, I like to cram as much information overload on screen as possible. And if you wanted to buy one of these items, you'd make sure you're online in-game and then simply click the direct whisper button, which will automatically send a whisper to that player. Wait for a moment, and then if they don't reply, simply whisper the next best option until someone replies or invites you to their party to trade. But what if you wanted to search for a well-rolled gold rim with better elemental resistances, as many of these are not that good? Well, you can click and sort by the elemental resistance stat, but that's not that helpful because then you get options like this, 35 divine gold rim here. That's probably not what you're looking to level your next character with. To do this a much better way, we want to use filters. Click the show filters button up in the top right here. Don't worry, this looks intimidating, but I'll show you just the important parts. For our gold rim example, we want to use a stat filter on the right here. We can type in the affix we want to filter by using the little squiggly line, aka the tilde key. That lets us not have to be super specific in what we type, so then we can say all elemental, and all elemental resistances will appear here. Then we can type in our desired minimum all resistance, say 30% for example, and then we can press enter, and here we go, sorted by the cheapest. But for uniques like this, there's a much easier way to do this. This little button down here on the bottom left of any listing, the magnifying glass, allows us to automatically filter by any stats on the item. So that's really good for uniques. If we just remove that previous filter, we can see here the evasion, rarity, and all resistances. If we don't care about these ones, we can uncheck them. And then we can sort by the elemental resistance here. We can also sort by multiple affixes if we want to have like the best possible rolls for, say, both the evasion and the all resistance. In order to find the roll ranges on uniques like this, we can mouse over the all resistance and see on the right hand side there the blue text that says 25 to 35. So we know the maximum roll is 35. Now there's a clever thing you can do to help you if you have a certain budget and want to simply find the best item possible for that budget. You can use the trade filters back here in show filters, and down the bottom over here is the buyout price. We can set this to exalted orb equivalent here and type in what our actual budget is. So let's say we only want to spend a maximum of 5 exalts on this. We'll go ahead and type 5 in there. Then what we can do is simply remove this if we want. Click search. And then we can sort by maximum all resistance within our budget. So we know that for 5 exalts now, the best we can possibly get is 32%. And we can have a look at a few options here because there's a chance that some of these might end up being a bit cheaper, or that we might find something that's slightly worse for much cheaper, like there could be a 31% here for 1 exalt. In this case though, it seems like 5 exalts for 32 is a good deal, so we'd probably message these people here. The main advantage of this method, searching with a maximum budget like that, is that it's quite fast. It avoids tinkering with minimum affixes to try and find the right items for your budget. You can just pretty quickly find what is the best that you can currently afford. So there's this whole list of preset filters on the left here that allows you to more easily find certain items. I'll take you through the ones that you're most likely to use and skip the rest to save us both some time. The type filters at the top here is the most common ones that you'll use all of the time. When searching for non-unique items, you should put in the item category to cut down on irrelevant results. So for example, if you're searching for a ring, you can simply type ring in here, and then your search will only turn up rings. This is pretty handy when you try to search affixes that are present on multiple different slots. Like if you put in life and 3 resistances, you're going to get all sorts of different things. But if you specifically want gloves, then put gloves in here. Item rarity here is mainly used for removing unique items from search results. For example, if I search for shields with 45% block here, I will get a bunch of Doomgate uniques, but I want rare items. I don't want those uniques. How do I get rid of all of these? I'll simply use the rarity to search any non-unique. So that'll go ahead and get rid of all of those and only show me the rare results. And finally here, item level is useful mostly for finding uncut gems. So if we type in any gem here, and then we put 19 in the item level, for whatever reason, that is the best way to find level 19 uncut skill gems. The equipment filters here is the next most commonly used section. If we input a weapon type, say for example crossbow, then we can use the physical DPS filter to find high damage ones. If we put in a minimum of 500 here, for example, we can find any crossbow with 500 or more physical DPS, and that's already calculated with quality as well. Now do note that this doesn't account for items that haven't been socketed, which could be a bargain if you socket them yourselves. If you're looking through this list and they're all socketed, which happens at high DPS typically, and then you see one that's unsocketed, that could be a bargain waiting to happen, because if you put in some runes, it'll be worth a lot all of a sudden. If we simply wanted to get the highest DPS weapon for our budget, instead what we can do is we can input the budget, our buyout price, so we can say our budget might be something like 300 Exalt equivalent, and then we'll search, and then we can click physical DPS at max quality here to sort by that figure. And we can see that for around that budget range, the best physical DPS we can get is something like 580. You do want to glance over all the different options here, at least for a couple pages, because you might see ones like this that are a little bit lower, that are much cheaper. But there's another method we can use to help with that. So we know that our higher end here is 580. So here's a big pro tip. We take that amount and we'll go a little bit lower. So let's say 560. We put it into the equipment filter here. And then we'll search again to sort by price instead. So here we can see that 62 Exalt ones right at the top. So we know our best bargains are right up here. But we can also see ones that, oh, okay, so this one, maybe one of these other ones has a little bit higher damage, but it's only a little bit more expensive. So we can find some better options that way. Both of these searches are really useful. This one for finding the cheapest option, and the other option by sorting for Phys DPS with a max budget for finding the highest damage that you can currently afford. Both of those are useful. Now this same strategy with equipment filters can be done for high armor gear, high block shields, and especially for high energy shield gear. So we could put in body armor, and then what we can do is we can put in any amount of energy shield, for example, even just one, and this will remove items that have pure armor or pure evasion, for example. Then we can put in our maximum budget, so we'll put in our 300 Exalted Orb equivalent here, and we'll search. Then what we can do is we can search energy shield at max quality. This will naturally only return pure energy shield gear with the highest possible results, and we can see that the highest energy shield is anything north of 900. Okay, so let's use the same thing that we learned before. We'll put in, let's say 850 into the energy shield minimum, and we'll sort by price this time instead. We could take out our buyout price if we want, but it doesn't actually matter with this method. And now we'll see any option that is 850 energy shield or more and the asking price. This one's probably a misprice, and the person is either playing a prank or going to get rid of it. But here we can see the next realistic one is this 35 Exalt one here, listed 8 minutes ago, which is probably a nice bargain if someone else hasn't already snatched it up. So we can then refine this search if we care about more things more than just energy shield, such as, for example, resistances. Then we can start using the stat filters to add resistances. Much more on that later. First though, just quickly to show you what else is here in the preset filters that is important that you'll want to use. Waystone filters are good for searching for you to get your relevant tiers of waystones. So you might want to put in a maximum unless you're doing, say, tier 15. So if you're comfortable doing 12 to 13s, you can put in waystone tier 12 to 13 there and search and find those very quickly and easily that way. Gem levels here and gem sockets here, alongside with item quality over here, can allow you to search for skill gems. But when searching for skill gems, you will want to put in the name of the actual skill that you want to get options for just it. Here we can see a bunch of level 19, 4 socket at least sparks with 20 quality. The corrupted option here is quite useful for removing corrupted items from your list. Say, for example, we wanted to find gold rims, once again, with the highest possible all elemental resistance rolls that aren't already corrupted so that we could corrupt them themselves. Then what we can do is we can say corrupted no and search, and once again sort by all elemental resistances and find these ones here that we can buy and corrupt ourselves. The rest of these filters here are very rarely used and not too hard to figure out. So for now, let's get onto some of the much more juicier stuff. This little square box right here is the most important button on the site. zoom in for dramatic effect. Well, I'll let the editor do that. Zoom in for dramatic effect. This is how you find truly good items, and knowing its secrets will also save you a ton of currency. Let me show you how by evolving a search for some nice movement speed boots, step by step. So the most basic and simplest is the default filter group, which is AND. This one right here. This means that every stat you put in here must be on the item. This is good when your boots must have 35 movement speed boots, and they must have life. You could even be specific and say they must have at least 95 life. Now you will only return search results, many of them, with 35 movement speed, or higher technically, and 110, well, your, 95 plus life. This is how most people search, and it's fine for very simple items, but it will give you bad items, and the more specific that you try and get with your filters here, the more expensive and fewer results you will get. If we put in our dream item with the exact stats that we want here using an AND filter, it will give us very few items and they will be very expensive. We avoid this problem by using the other filters in more and more clever ways to give us more results for better and cheaper items. Ideally, you want to use AND filters very sparingly, only for the stats that absolutely must be on the item. For example, just movement speed. Anything else should be in a count or weighted sum filter that I'll explain now. So we can add another filter group here with add stat group, and we'll now talk about the count filter. You'll use the count filter group option pretty often as it's quite flexible and useful. Count allows you to input a number into the minimum to say that I want any of the stats I put in this group in this specific amount. So for example, if we put 1 to the count minimum, it'll mean that any one of these affixes that I add here must be on the item. So for our boot example, let's say that we must have 35 movement speed, so we put that in its own separate AND group. That has to be on the item. Then let's say that we're happy with any 2 of fire, lightning, or cold resistance, because any 2 of them could work if we change some gear around. We'll go ahead and add those 3 resistances here, and then we'll change the count minimum to 2. We'll also want to put something in the minimums here if we have a minimum that we want the boots to have, for example. So let's say that we need at least 35 of any one of these. We'll go ahead and input 35 into the minimum for each of them. We could even get more specific, say that, well, actually, if we landed fire, it could be 32 because my other gear's a bit better for that, and so on. Once we have figured out our minimum numbers here and our count, we can then search for 35 movement speed boots that have any 2 of the resistances with at least these amounts. And this is already much better. We have many more results, much better quality of boots, and this is a much more useful sort of search for us to begin tinkering with. Now we may want to even add chaos resistance to this because chaos resistance is excellent, and if we got it, it could mean the rest of our gear could be a little bit better. Chaos resistance doesn't roll as high, so we might put a minimum of something like 20 in. With our count of 2, now we can get any 2 of cold, fire, lightning, or chaos resistance, and that gives us even more options and potentially better ones. This is going to give us much better results than if we searched specifically for certain resistances. Not to mention that you would have to do like a bunch of different searches to try and do that. You can do everything in one search using the count method. Count filters are very useful when your options are many and also flexible. That's the key takeaway here. That's what makes the count filter great for finding jewels. For jewels, you have a ton of affixes that are relevant for your build. And on most of the time, you're going to want a jewel that just has any 3 or 4 of these affixes. So you'll notice this jewel search for one of my crossbow builds here has all of these options typed in. And for many of them even, especially the ones that I find a bit weak if they're rolled poorly, I have minimum amounts put in that we can tune over time as we see a jewel that say, actually that one's not good enough. I will make sure I put in a minimum for that. So for example, stun build-up is 10 to 20. I'll say I only really want to see stun if it's over 15%. Same thing for accuracy being 5 to 10%. Let's say I'd put in a minimum of 8 for that. If I search this, I now get any jewel that has 4 of the affixes on my list. And your results are going to get better the more options you have in the count menu here, because it's more potential jewels that can be looked at. So you can see I got 152 results here. So if you're getting too few results, you'd want to be a bit less specific with your minimums or add more possible good affixes to your dual search. And you can, of course, combine this once again with the AND option. So if I absolutely must have mana on kill recovery, I could put that up here in an AND filter. I could even say I need to make sure that I have a duel with 2. We'd leave this in the count filter, because then a duel with 4 affixes could have that. Well, it would have to have that. But remember that as we get more specific, we may want to make sure that we reduce the amount of count that we get as well. So if we want a very specific duel and it's getting harder to get, we might have to settle for something that only has 3 of the affixes we want. So here we managed to get 30 results of mana on kill duels that fit my search criteria. That's pretty good. Back to our boot example though, we can do way better than just using and count to find the best possible pair of boots that are really cheap for us. To truly ascend to become gods of Path of Exile trade, you must master the weighted sum filter. Weighted sum allows you to assign a point value to stats and say that you want an item worth as many points as possible. That is very powerful and has many uses. Let's rework our boot search here to start taking advantage of weighted sums. I'm going to go ahead and delete the count option here, but we're going to keep the 35% movement speed and filter because 35% movement speed is non-negotiable. So let's say for our search here, we want 35% movement speed boots with the most resistances possible. Let's use weighted sum v2 to do just that. We'll add each resistance into the filter group here. And now the fun part, we'll assign them all a point value. Whatever we put in weight here is how much each of these stats is worth per point. So if we put a 1 in each weight like this, that means 1% fire resistance is worth 1 point of weight. So 40% fire resistance would be 40 points. And it also means that 40% fire and 40% lightning would be combined total 80 points. So you can see where this is going. Let the magic begin. Searching this option gives us this new stat down here, sum. We can see that this item here of 38% cold resistance, and it has a sum total, of course, of 38%. And this one that is a combined 41 resistances has a sum of 41. That's brilliant. But what's really brilliant about that is what it lets us do. These items are garbage, right? We can do way better. And we have a few options to do just that. If we click sum, we can sort by items with the most points, aka the combined most total resistances. So this mirror-worthy pair of boots here has 131 combined resistances, nearly perfect rolls. So we can combine this method of sorting with what we've learned earlier using a maximum budget. We'll put in our 300 Exalted Orb equivalent here. And then we can search and once again sort by sum. And now we can see that for under 300 Exalts total, we can get boots that somewhere cap out around 90 combined resistances. Much more realistic. The other method of searching this is to go back to the weighted sum group here and take a look at this minimum one here, which is very useful. So let's, for example, say we know that we want boots with at least 85 total resistances, and we know that our budget is going to give us something like that. We'll go ahead and put in 85 minimum here, and we can uncap our budget if we want to see anything that kind of comes in a little bit higher than that. And then we can just click search, and that will give us any boots with 85 or more total resistances, and it will sort them by cheapest first. So now we know the cheapest boots we can get that have at least 85 resistances and 35 move speed are 30 exalts right here. Pretty good. This is the best way to get the cheapest rolls here that meet your minimum standards. Just tinker with the sum amount here, this amount, until you get something that is kind of appropriate for your budget or meets your minimum standard. Now, what about chaos resistance? That's a resistance, and most builds want quite a lot of that as well. We could input chaos resistance into here, and we could give that a point value. But if we sorted by this, if we searched like this right now, we wouldn't actually see many items with chaos resistance at all. And that's because chaos resistance rolls much lower amounts than elemental resistances, and we've assigned it the same point value. As such, we want to actually consider that, okay, chaos resistance is probably about twice as good and twice as valuable as regular resistances to us. So we can input 2 here, and now we'll start to get some chaos resistance results. But you'll notice that we're not getting all chaos resistance results, which means our number is probably pretty correct or pretty close to. We can see that we have some chaos mixed with elemental here, some pure elemental with higher rolls here, and so on. This is because each point of chaos resistance is worth 2 points. We can tinker with this number to get it to feel kind of just right, And you can use decimal points as well. So 1.9 is probably more close to accurate. So we can mess with that until we get a nice mixture of possible results. Or you can base this number more on what you want. If you really want chaos resistance, for example, then you could boost the value here. This will, of course, show you mostly items with chaos resistance because you've assigned it such a high value. But you'll still get some items that are just too good to pass up that don't have chaos res because they still have so much other resistance. Keep tinkering with your numbers here, both your weighting and also your total sum, and of course your budget as well, to try and find the most possible and best results for you. The sky's really the limit with this sort of weighted sum searching, and as such, let's get into some more advanced things you can do with it. This will cover you 90% of the time. Now remember that we actually wanted life on our boots. Let's get the most possible life for as cheap as possible here too. We'll add another weighted sum filter group here, and then we're going to put in any affix that gives us life and give it a weight. So obviously we need life, and we'll give life a weight of 1, so each point of life is worth 1. That's a good starting point for us. Now we also know that strength is equivalent to 2 life. Each point of strength is 2 life. So naturally we'll give it a point rating of 2. So the life provided by strength is also worth 1 point. It just so happens that each point of strength gives us 2. Very easy and simple. That's the only options here that we really care about for boots. So let's just remove our minimum weight search here from the resistances, or we could even just disable the entire group and just search by maximum life here for a moment. Now you'll notice that if we don't disable this one here, we'll actually still see 2 sum totals here, but it's easy enough to figure out which is which by just looking at the conversions here. So we see 66 life as this one, so the life one here is on top. Now what we can do is we can click the life sum and find out what is the most combined total life that we can get on a pair of boots. And that's something around 200 to 210. That's only obviously going to be boots that have both life and strength does compete with resistances, so we'll have to keep that in mind. If we go too high on the life amount that we want to try and get, or too high on the resistance amount, it's going to effectively muscle out the strength or the resistances and make our search not work so well. So what we want to do now is, in order to find boots with the most possible life, what we want to consider is, what is the minimum possible resistances that we can get away with here? So if we say that's a total of 75, then we could input that, and we don't have to include a minimum threshold for the life. We can search, we can put in our max budget like so, and then we can sort by the life sum. So again, 38, 38, we click this one, and that gives us the highest possible life rolls with at least 75 resistances. So there's some pretty great boots here for some reasonable prices, especially some of these ones here that are a little bit cheaper. If we wanted to find more of the cheap options instead of scrolling through, we could of course try and input some minimums here. So if we wanted to put in a minimum life of 120, for example, because keep in mind, if you went too high, then it would basically require the boots to have strength, which would muscle out the resistances. We could sort these and it would give us the cheapest boots with at least 120 life and 75 combined resistances. Or the other route is to lower our maximum budget. Now there's only 4 results here, so that's pretty easy. We can sort through those and find some pretty nice 30 Exalt boots here, and maybe compare them to some of the more expensive options to see just how much better they are. So we can see from the sums here that the life here is about 20 better and the resistances are a bit better. So is that worth paying an extra 70 Exalts for? You would have to decide yourself. Do remember to pay attention to any sockets that either are there or unfilled, or any corruptions as well. Now we could leave this here. These are great, well-refined results that get you boots that you need that are really cheap and effective. And this is better than what 99% of PoE players are doing. But the deeper we go, the cheaper and better boots we'll find. We can consider things like corruptions and sockets to really spice things up. But how do we actually effectively do that here in a search? Using the max roll planner here, we can create some boots, simulate here, and corrupt them, and check the available enchantments. Now we can see there's some pretty interesting things here, including some pretty large amount of resistances, as well as movement speed. Interesting. Now we could also try and work in some of the fancier things like max lightning resistance, for example, and slowing potency as well. It's going to vastly increase the complexity of a search. We'll try and stay on target here somewhat, and we'll try and incorporate these resistances and this movement speed into our search to get even better results. Do keep in mind though that one of the corruption outcomes is to add an additional socket, making for potentially 2 socket boots. There's not really a good way to incorporate that into this style of search currently. That may come as they make further improvements to the trade site, which some of the search options are a little bit limited right now, but it is something that you can search for separately. Remember that 2 sockets could give something like an extra 24% resistances or 50 extra total life. but you can indeed search for socketed items using the item filters here by putting in one rune socket. You can have your minimum stats here, maybe be a little bit more open to lower amounts so that you can compare to items that have 2 rune sockets, for example, that are corrupted. And if you don't get any major interesting results, then that's fine. But we can see this 120 Exalt example right here, for example, is currently socketed with 2 armor evasion energy shield runes. Those could be easily replaced to boost this, you know, somewhat paltry 91 life up to 140, or increase the resistances dramatically as well, all of a sudden making that much more competitive. But let's work in all the potential corruptions as well using weighted sums. So going back to our main search here, we want to add the corrupted resistances to our resistance search. To do that, we'll type tilde, and then we'll start typing enchant, and then we'll also start typing resistance. And we can make this easy by copy pasting this. So we can copy paste lightning, fire, and cold. And there was no chaos resistance enchant, so we don't need to worry about that here. And we'll give these the same weighting of 1, as 1 fire res from an enchantment is just as good as 1 fire resistance from an affix. We can go back to having our minimum total resistance here. And it's a good idea to just do a test search each step as you go, just to make sure that there's no errors or if anything weird's going on, and so you can see all of your available options and also get an idea of like how many options you're getting to, how close you are to honing into the items you want. Now we can see that if we uncheck these enchants and search, we get 1001 matches. And if we add them, we get 1042. So it's not a lot extra, but one of those extra 40 boots could be the exact pair that we want. And the more powerful your searches are and the more flexible they are, the more results you're going to be potentially adding. So that's already a pretty good starting place, but remember that the movement speed was also available. So we can do something interesting with that. We can add a weighted sum here for movement speed. We can remove this minimum and instead put it up here. We can give a movement speed a rating of 1. 1% of movement speed is 1 point. And then we can type in enchant and movement speed, and we can add that in with 1 weighting as well. Now this will search for any boots that have 30% movement speed plus a 5% corruption, or just 35% movement speed. You'll mostly just get boots with 35% movement speed if we do this search, but you will occasionally get some corrupted ones that have a maximum roll. Now, if you wanted to be a little clever with this, you could type in 33, and this will only cost you 2% movement speed, but it's still going to get you some pretty fast boots that potentially will add a few more options to your search. We got another 3 or 4 options it looked like there. So that includes some of those, and we can verify that they're in the list by searching maximum sum movement speed as well. So if we use the sum movement speed, we can see that we're getting, there's this one here, for example. That's very expensive for 4% movement speed and 35. So that's obviously the craziest amount. But the important thing with this filter here is that it'll look for the 30% with a corruption, or it'll just look for your 35s. And most of the time you're just going to get your 35s, but it gives you a few more potential options. And that's what we're all about here. So now let's take a look at our final very fancy and very effective boot search right now. Using weighted search for movement speed, we look for over 30% movement speed boots by including both the regular affix and corruptions. We then look for at least 75% combined total resistances from affixes and corruptions, giving a higher weighting to chaos resistance because of its increased value and lower roll amounts. And then we give life and strength a point value based on how much life they add so that we can sort by that amount. We'll add a minimum of 75 resistance and 33 movement speed, and we'll leave the weighted sum for life empty. Then when we do our search, we can sort by total life by identifying which of the sums is that. So 23 life equals 23 sum here. So we can sort by that. And then we can find the best possible boots. Obviously this is out of budget. So what we do is we input our maximum budget. That's 300 Exalt equivalent. And I do actually recommend going a little bit over your budget. So if your budget's 300, search for 320, because if you find a pair of boots for like 310, that are significantly better, then you will want to just convert some currency from your stash or save up until you can get them. So we'll go ahead and do that search. And once again, we'll sort by life. Now what we have is the first of 2 options to find the best possible boots or the best possible cheapest boots. So this first option finds the best possible highest life boots within our budget. So we don't say, we're saying, I don't care too much what I spend as long as it's within budget. What I want is the best possible thing. So here we have the highest maximum life and the combined resistance that meets our minimum threshold, as well as the movement speed. It's even got an open socket. It's only 100 Exalts. What a great pair of boots. We could take a look at the few different options just visually here to get an idea and see that, okay, there's one here that's a bit cheaper that's also quite competitive. It's only a little bit worse than this by 9 life. So we might want to consider those options as well, because saving that extra 40 exalts could be spent elsewhere on something a bit more impactful than just the 9 life we're losing out on. Of course, we'll want to tinker with these numbers here. So like push that resistance up a little bit or push it down a little bit if we can get away with it to try and find even more and even better results. But that's a very good result right here. And then the second option is to find the cheapest boots that meet our minimum standards. So instead of using our maximum buyout price here, what we'll do is we'll try and figure out roughly how much life we want. And then we'll put in a weighted sum total here. So we'll say 120 life. And then we'll search. And this will give us the cheapest boots that have at least 120 life and the amount of resistance and movement speed that we have. So we can see now that we get these 30 exalt pair of boots, which is the ones we found further down the list. And those are our best and cheapest option that meet this. Now, these aren't necessarily the ones with the most life, but they meet our minimum standards and they do it as cheaply as possible. So you have those two really great options. Find boots that meet your standards as cheap as possible, or find boots that are the best possible within your budget. And you can do all that with the same search just by changing whether you use buyout price and sorting by maximum or by using minimums. Now, you obviously don't need to get this fancy for buying some 10 exalt budget boots, or for just price checking every random drop. I mean, you can and it will work, but there's so many options at that level of gear that it's not really necessary nor very time efficient. Use simple AND filters and count filters for more basic things. If you just need some budget move speed boots with life and a single resistance, then just use some AND filters for that. But whenever you want something that's going to be a major gear purchase for you, it's using up most of your budget, it's a big upgrade, it's an item you're going to have a long time, or when you're price checking a drop that you think is extremely valuable, then you can start to use tools like this to find more results and get a much better look at the market. So let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. That's it for now. I'm Ziggy D, and thanks for watching.